scholarly venues as well. So we're not coming as if we're going to deliver the commandments, we're going to deliver all the answers. We're coming with the hope that we'll add something and help move the discussion along, and really with the hope that we can help to, with your engagement, help think about some protocols or some questions to use in talking about these topics. And I really appreciate my panelists and their thought that already they've been putting into this. We have Steve Fox from UMass, long-time veteran of the Washington Post, and is coordinator of the multimedia program at UMass, director of sports journalism there. Jenny Whitehouse, who I've known for a long time from days that we're both at the University of Missouri in grad school, and both done ethics scholarship for a while. Jenny's at Eastern Kentucky University right now, and she is the editor of the Cases and Commentaries section for the Journal of Mass Media Ethics, which, if you're not aware of, is a great resource for discussion in the classroom. And then Kelly Fincham of Hofstra, who spent a long time with newspapers in Ireland and Australia. Has been part of some online startups and has been very engaged recently in thinking about social media ethics. So thanks to you all, and we'll jump in on really with the idea of our starting point is three topics that we think are relevant in this area. One is verification, and what's the distinctive role of the journalist in the large and open-ended network of information that we're functioning in. And then secondly, privacy considerations, and third, the ambiguity of roles and of the divide or the lack of clear divide between the personal and the professional when it comes to work of journalists. Of course, there are other issues out there. We were just talking beforehand about the idea of unpublishing, deleting tweets, and there are a lot of things we can talk about. As I said, I really want to get you all engaged in this to the extent that we can do all this in an hour. But we'll take each topic in turn, throw it up into the panel, throw it up into you, and then hopefully have time to talk about other issues that may be on your minds. And please, as we'd like to follow up, as I said, kind of using this as a springboard to work on some protocols of questions. So if you tweet your thoughts, we'll work through those later. And so without any more introducing, we'll jump in. So the topic of verification and the related topic of how journalists should think about their distinctive role in the information network. What's their independent responsibility? What does that look like in 2013, and what should it look like going forward? So it's our first topic, and I know we've all been thinking about this, but maybe Steve, you could start us off with some thoughts on what the ethical challenges in this area look like to you.
Good morning, everyone. I don't know about you all, but I woke up this morning thinking about last night's talk, not about social media ethics. I'm still thinking about it, and it was interesting because there was kind of a history given, where we've been and where we're headed, and I was thinking about, Twitter really hasn't been around for that long, and one of the things that I wanted to talk about a little bit about today is this the notion of a retweet culture. And I know that there was verification discussion last year at this conference. I was not here, but early on in the years of Twitter, we saw a lot of the Twitterati saying that retweeting was not endorsement. I tell my students the exact opposite. That when you retweet something, you are putting your name, and if you're working for a news organization, you're putting the name of your news organization attached to that. Increasingly, especially, we have many examples in recent years. The most prominent example recently being Newtown, where there was a lot of retweeting going on, but people did not know whether or not what they were retweeting was true. So you saw retweeting of the gun information, you saw retweeting of the name, and it's this notion that's kind of carried through that, I can retweet it without necessarily knowing whether it's true, without endorsing it. And I think that that's a real faulty type of thinking when it comes to ethics, because we as journalists end up passing along a lot of bad information. We end up creating harm. Yet we hide behind this notion, oh, well, I was just retweeting what somebody else was reporting. There was one, there's a lot of discussion after Newtown. I remember one column specifically, Matthew Ingram of Gigagom saying that, well, this kind of, this notion of process journalism, this notion of, people being able to see how the sausage is made, this is just how it is now. I don't buy that. That's, you're hiding behind the process, and you're not fulfilling your duty as a journalist to go out and, you should be re-reporting, confirming on your own that what's happening is true. That's what we do. And I think that more and more this retweet culture is getting into the minds of journalists, and I worry about it getting into the minds of our students, and trying to find a way to really get away from that notion of retweeting and doing your job. I was going back and reading a column that I wrote for OJR in 2012, basically saying the same thing. This was after Paterno and Giffords, and I remember when the Paterno information came out. I'll just mention this and then stop. But a friend of mine who teaches social media, a pretty prominent person, had retweeted that Paterno was dead. And so in my mind, she had retweeted the CBS tweet, but in my mind I was attaching the truth and verification to her tweet. I'm like, well, if she's tweeting it, it's got to be true. And I was like, just a millimeter away from hitting the retweet button. And okay, well, maybe I should go to ESPN and check this out. Go to ESPN. ESPN said that Paterno wasn't dead, and then it became clear that there was a problem. So I just I think that getting through to our students this notion that reporting on your own, confirming on your own before retweeting is the way to go.
Kelly, Jenny, any thoughts on what our responsibility looks like and as journalism educators?
All right, so I'll jump in there. I kind of disagree with Steve on this in the nicest way possible. I think there's an issue around the term endorsement, because some people think that endorsement means that you're endorsing a particular viewpoint, maybe if you're tweeting about politics. And then other people think that endorsing means that you are verifying that information that you're passing on. And I think, as Steve says, we saw a lot of misinformation floating around during Newtown. And we can go back to the Gabby Giffords shooting as well, and we saw many reputable news organisations caught with omelette all over their face, for want of a better description. So what to do? What is the best way out of it? I feel that one way that we should do it is to say that so-and-so is reporting that this happened. I cannot verify this yet, because that's possibly what happened years ago with the wire services. It's not perfect, but reporters are under an awful lot of pressure, primarily from their bosses a lot of the time, to be ahead of the competition. So you have these kind of competing things going on. You've got the reporter who's trying to get ahead with the story, and anyone who worked, my background is print, and I remember one big story that we worked on was the Omagh bombing in Northern Ireland in August 1998, and we had so many casualty figures, which all turned out to be wrong. But luckily for us, our product at the time was a print product, and we didn't publish until 12 hours after the event, so we were able to verify everything. The pressure on journalists now to try and verify everything in real time is leading to serious errors. And also, there's an idea about putting in your profile that retweets aren't endorsements. But that's problematic, because a lot of times that retweets are seen, they're seen in a stream. So people aren't necessarily going to go back to the profile and find out that this person has categorically stated, I am not endorsing either this viewpoint or this news. So I think for reporting, probably that we need to come up with some kind of protocol that says, so-and-so has reported this, and I cannot verify it, but this is what they're saying. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know, but I think that you have a space constraint, number one, with 140 characters. But I think we had talked about this at lunch yesterday, and you were talking about retweeting political stories, and I think, what I'm talking about is the breaking news environment. And a lot of the journalists that were retweeting during Newtown really should have known better. We all have worked in newsrooms, and we all know those first couple of hours after a major breaking news story, the information is going to be faulty. You add into the fact that this was a horrible, horrible story, that there's emotions were high, and try and track down all the information about the shooter, and that compounds the inaccuracies, and makes it more incumbent upon us. I mean, you can say, I don't know whether this is true, but then what are we doing? I don't know what that is. It's not, it's more and more, you see that a lot in cable news outlets, you see that with the broadcast outlets where, the spaghetti against the wall journalism where, we're going to throw it out there, but we don't know whether it's true or not. But I don't know that that's necessarily what we should be doing.
And if we don't know it's true, what else? Then we only have our credibility. And if we don't have our credibility, what else do we have? We're just like anybody else throwing out guesses and misses. I'm a little bit concerned by the idea that, we have journalists facing pressure from their editors to get information, therefore we can cut ethical corners.
I don't think it's cutting an ethical corner. I think what's happened here is that journalism has become way more public. People now see the process, and I think we're in the midst of trying to figure out how to make it work.
I think the best way to make it work is to take a step back, gently and respectfully, to take a
We're
step.
so polite this hour of the morning.
Oh, yes. I've already had my cup of tea. Gently and respectfully, to take a step back and say, do we really know this is true? And again, we were talking about the fact that endorsement really implies like a political commentary, an opinion. Facts are facts. And so slowing down just a little bit is good, because ultimately, because things last forever, we may actually end up seeing a world where deadline isn't everything anymore. Getting it right is everything. Kim?
It just occurs to me, has anybody done the research? Clearly what we need is some verification that the audience wants it right now rather than right. Right?
I think that's a great study for you to do.
I personally would rather have a source that I can go to and know that if they're reporting it, they are at least supremely confident that it is true, rather than they think it's probably true because they've seen 3 other people report it. They haven't actually done any verification themselves, but I'm willing to wait 15 minutes or 20 minutes or a half an hour, and I think somebody needs to do the research to find out whether or not the vast public feels the same way.
It gets us in this situation. I'm going to go back all the way back to Monica Gate. I can still see Katie Couric interviewing the editor of Newsweek on the Today Show, and asking him if what he had heard about the whole situation. He said, and I can't remember which Newsweek editor, but he said, there are a lot of rumors floating around, but I don't want to comment on them. And Katie Couric said, well, we have heard this X, Y, and Z about Monica Lewinsky. Have you heard it too? And the fact that the Newsweek had heard it was supposed to be enough to make it true. So it was okay that the Today Show was reporting it. I think in retweet land, we're doing the exact same kind of thing. Somewhere along the line, we have to expect more out of ourselves.
Yeah, but
I think it's a good question, but I also think that people, the audience, obviously the audience wants it now. This is the environment we live in. We all want information now. That's accepted. But if you're passing along bad information, misinformation, factually incorrect information, we all know that that's the information that tends to stick with the audience. That the correction that follows doesn't necessarily stick as much as that initial piece. There are countless examples out there of this. So I think that in the grinding 24-hour cycle where news is instant, it's even more incumbent upon us. And you talk a lot of times. You talk about commodity news, right? So everybody's chasing the same story. So why not take a little bit longer and be the one that's got it right?
Yeah, but say in the case of Gabby Giffords, I mean, NPR is about, well, for me, it's about as reputable a source as you can get. Although, I don't know if you know that in Europe, the nickname for NPR is National Pentagon Radio, but however, I digress. But when NPR tweeted that Gabby Giffords was actually dead, I think one of the issues that came out of that for me was that there was a lack of local reporting on the ground there, and the NPR was depending on other reports from other people who it trusted. So you had this kind of cascade of trust that backfired on everyone, which then points back to, well, why weren't there more local reporters there, and how the locals on the scene who were tweeting, who many people weren't following that day, were being much more cautious in their reporting.
Yeah, and you know, NPR is definitely a trusted source. You know, I love NPR, friends that work at NPR. But you know, since when did we as journalists start trusting? You know, you know, am I going to trust another news organization just because they're a prominent news organization? Pick your news organization. I mean,
That's
it's
true.
not. You know, again, it's, you know, we've gotten more and more into this mentality. Well, if X, Y, and Z is reporting it, this must be true, and that's crap. You know, you got to go out and pick up the phone and make the call to the hospital in Arizona, or or track down the name of the person in Newtown. Excuse me. You know, it's a picking up the phone exercise.
That's a
9
good
times out of
point.
10.
Why aren't reporters picking up the phone more often? And does anyone else struggle with it in the classroom? You know, ring someone. Don't send them an email on Friday afternoon.
They're not getting back to me by email. I don't understand this.
No, Leslie's been waiting to ask something.
I think all of these are wonderful points, but it strikes me that in the views we've been expressing so far, we're talking about adapting social media to uses we already know. And I think one of the things that's happened is that social media has changed things. It's changed our sourcing. It's given us new tools like curation. And I'm particularly thinking of what Andy Carvin is doing. And, you know, essentially he's retweeting, but it's a particular form of retweeting. He's also adding something on and saying, you know, I haven't heard whether this source is true. Does anybody know this? Can anyone translate this? But he's building up a context. It's not just one tweet at a time.
Sorry, I don't mean to. I have my tea and now I'm off now. But yeah, maybe we're not thinking about Twitter in the way it possibly should be used, which is more engagement and crowdsourcing and asking people out there, have you heard this? What have you heard? And maybe we're still thinking about it as a broadcast tool. We are telling you what happened, and we're wrong, actually.
Yeah, I mean, that's the reality that we are in, whether we want to declare it to be otherwise. I mean, we're in part of the network. We're part of broader process, public process, and that's where we are. And I think that's why ethics right now. I meant to say at the beginning that part of our reference point on this panel was the sort of classic principles that Pointers use, the SPJ uses: seek truth and report it, act independently, minimize harm, and on the premise that those are all still relevant, although as Pointers Symposium, they're doing a lot to try to rethink that, but those are all elements that I think we'd agree maybe they need to be reframed, maybe they need to be like issues of transparency brought in more strongly. They're still relevant, but at the same time, the environment is totally different than what it was only a few years ago. So, really important point that we need to, the ethics needs to be in that reality. Our engagement, even in the discussion of ethics, needs to be with that in mind. So, any other comments related to this topic before we switch to the next one? Jeremy?
I feel like the audience brings different expectations of Twitter medium as well, and so I think that one of the things we learned from Andy Carvin is that journalism can be a process as well. And so people are starting to see reporting out of things like Newtown where there were mistakes made, but they see the messiness of the journalistic process. That we're finding out information, we're verifying, we sometimes get things wrong, and the problem is they're seeing it on the back end before the stories are coming out. So I do think that I think it's important to stop and give the audience a little bit of credit that they understand this is going on. That they may see the mistakes, but that they also realize that experiencing news on Twitter is different than experiencing a written up story or something on a newscast. And so we could be changing long-term in terms of consumption as well. People are starting to bring this expectation to what they're viewing in social.
I mean, if you talk, the audience, if the audience is journalists, I would say yes. I don't know, I mean, I actually talk about studies, that would be a good one. As far as how many people understand, that this is reporting, that, reporting is a matter of figuring out what's right and what's wrong. I mean, I want to get back to Carvin for a second, because, I mean, you look at what Carvin and you look at what Christoph are doing, and yeah, they're using it as a reporting tool. But even Carvin admits that, when he was tweeting during Newtown, that there were people who were coming to his tweets, and there was missing context. So he had a whole series of tweets, and saying that he didn't know what necessarily didn't know exactly what was going on. But then people saw one tweet or two tweets and attached truth to that. So I think that is still, and it was a different thing. Here was a very, in reality, here was a U.S.-based story that was close to Americans, and you put that next to Middle Spring, and they're a little bit different. You can see the difference with what he was doing with Middle Spring versus Newtown, and the emotions that were attached to Newtown, the bad information that was perpetuating versus. He was trying to get at a little bit more deeper stuff with his reporting with Middle Spring.
All right, well, let's switch over to privacy for now. I may come back to the other topic, but what are the biggest ethical challenges related to privacy as we're thinking about journalists engaging with social media? And Jenny, do you want to start us off on that?
Yeah.
All right.
Because I want to build on what Steve just talked about, and the idea that maybe what the public expects and what journalists expect are two entirely different things. And that ties into exactly what you were just saying, the public understanding of how Twitter was being used in that case, and was it a factoid or was it a search for truth? What really ties into privacy. There, as we know, is a big, huge difference between law and ethics. And professionals tend to say, in my observations, the professionals I know tend to say something to the effect of, I didn't break the law, therefore I'm being ethical. That is, I'm sure you have encountered that assumption as well. And we come back to the age-old question of just because you can, should you? Journalists' understanding of what invasion of privacy is based on the law. I have the freedom to do this, therefore I can. The public's understanding of invasion of privacy is based on ethics. Do you really need to do that? And if there's a question that we could potentially start with that would improve our credibility, it should be, do we really need to do that? What is the value? Anything having to do with invasion of privacy, in my opinion, has to do with the utilitarian idea of greater good. For whatever reason, we have some facts and information about this person. Is it doing a greater good to present that information to the public? Is there some greater good out there from achieving that end, or is there a way we can do that that is not quite as invasive? And that again gets back to, okay, just because we can, should we? That's a basic idea that we could say, oh, that applies to all reporting. It gets magnified 100 times when we start talking about online information gathering, because people, of course, put their whole lives out there. And even though they've already put it out there, is it ethical to always reach in and grab those nuggets and broadcast it? I think a starting example is the Westchester, New York News Journals. Journal News. Did they really need to give the names and addresses of all gun owners in the city? Okay, they could do it legally, public information. But would they have accomplished the same ends by printing information by blocks or by zip codes? would you have the impact in the same way without the invasion of privacy? Al Tompkins suggests that they go one step further and say, okay, you didn't do enough reporting. Why is this relevant? Why weren't you doing good data journalism and comparing gun permits, say, to felony convictions? Take the information and put it in context, not just like you're rolling a bowling ball. Justin faced a really interesting question with the Newtown shootings and Facebook. I'm going to pass it off to Justin.
So in the wake of the Newtown shootings in my newsroom, as many outlets did, as we recovered from the shock of it and moved into the mourning portion of it, one of the things that our managers wanted was a gallery on our website of the victims. You know, they wanted the portraits of the victims, they wanted information about each of them. And it was slowly trickling out at the time, a little bit about some of the kids, a little bit about some of the teachers and the people that were killed in that shooting. The Associated Press pushed a couple of photos on their wire. I think I remember about 6 of them. So one of our editors grabbed them and threw them into a gallery because they were available, and presumably if the AP had them, they were provided by family members. Needless to say, I go home for the night and I wake up the next morning, and imagine my shock when I wake up the next morning and all of a sudden we've got a photo of every single victim in the shooting on our site. First, I clean up the coffee that I spit everywhere. Second, I call and I say, well, where did we get these photos? And my managing editor would breathlessly exhorting, well, so-and-so did a great job of getting on Facebook and looking up these memorial pages that people had created.
Oh my goodness.
And once again, I had to clean up something I had spit. And I said, what are you possibly doing? You know, are we in this to do a story, or are we in this because our managers want to goose page view numbers and, you know, completely blow out our backfill advertising? Because obviously everybody knows 1 click, 2 clicks, 3 clicks adds up to 26 clicks, and that really beefs up your page view numbers. And you can turn around and say, we had a photo gallery of the portraits of the victims that got 70,000 page views, and that looked great to somebody who doesn't understand the ethics of social media. You know, getting back to it, are we going to get sued for taking these photos off of Facebook? Very likely not.
Well, I mean, the question is one that, I mean, I think that a lot of people have grappled with is, and this is, again, this is the difference between, I think, journalists, what journalists think and what the public thinks, and then where the law is. And, you know, is Facebook public or private? You know, or is it somewhere in between? Is it in this gray area? I mean, I had a similar situation with a student, with a student reporter who, it wasn't a picture, but it was pulling down information off of a Facebook page of a student who died at UMass. And he went to the memorial service, and the friends of the person who died, and it wasn't anything inflammatory. It was actually some nice comments about the student who died. They tracked him down and kicked him out of the memorial service, saying that they had invaded the privacy. So I think it's a real, you know, it's kind of, you know, is it public? Is it private? Is it gonna backfire on you as a journalist if you use information off a Facebook page? I mean, it's real. I think it's a real wrestling match.
Can I jump in there for a sec? Sorry, Ginny. Would it have helped, you think, in the newsroom if there was, you know, like a clear set of guidelines that says, you know, in the event of an atrocity or whatever, we cannot take victims' pictures from their Facebook pages unless there's been, you know, like prior consent, or for memorial pages. Like if there was some sort of sense of some guidelines.
Yeah, there needs to be a standard. I mean,
Yeah.
There needs to be a standard of how much is this advanced. I always like to frame it in, how much are we advancing this story? Does it advance the story, or are we just doing it to do it because we can? Should versus can is an amazingly simple but powerful question.
My argument is, and yes, I think having guidelines would be helpful, but rather than something even as specific as that, I would love it if we used general social media as the starting point rather than the end point. Okay, you've got those Facebook pictures. We know where it is. You use that information to reach out and say, oh my goodness, we found these people, maybe the picture, we still have an accuracy question. Do we know that the picture is legit? So we got one side, an accuracy question. On the other side, we have, the public's gonna think this is a little creepy, whether they should or not. That's going to be the interpretation. But if somehow I go make contact and say, I saw your memorial page, it was beautiful. You mentioned that Johnny loved baseball. I see that. That is so great. Tell me more about how Johnny loves baseball.
Well, that used to be the case in a newsroom.
So let's use social media as the starting point for reporting about tragedy, not the ending point.
I mean, I don't think it's unusual. I mean, it's standard operating procedure for photos of victims, you know, to get pictures to go with the story.
Right.
What's interesting is, you know, I think that more. I mean, that's a call we've all made, and it's a horrible call to make. Calling the family and saying, "Hey, I need a picture of Joey or whatever." And I think that, you know, and I, you know, when you talk to students who are faced with this, I had a student last semester who actually had to do this, and she didn't want to call the family. And I'm like, you got to call the family. I mean, that's just, you know. And I think more and more that this is, you know, seen also as a way of getting around that. You know, I don't have, the picture's out there, it's public. I don't have to call the family and get the photo.
And that's wimpy, in my opinion.
Yes.
That's wimpy, because you're denying the family the right to shape the images of the story. There is something to be said
That's a good point.
for the dignity of being able to frame at least a little bit of your own death, and to give the family opportunity. I think that's where the ethical problem is. I can't, and this is where we start talking about grief. I can't deal with your grief, therefore I'm going to yank this out. I never personally had a problem calling with a family, because I would start with, I am so sorry for your loss. I am honored to have the opportunity to share more about your loved one. If we can teach our students to show that call is the ultimate act of compassion, to get over their own stuff and to reach out, I think that's where the real journalism happens.
Other comments related to this privacy issue? Yeah.
Just kind of I guess, a general question. I'm in agreement, I think, with what you're saying when we're talking about a victim of something. Where do we draw that line now? When we have access to, you know, the photo of Aurora Shooter, or, you know, is there a privacy concern there, or are we saying it's okay to go on Facebook and grab, you know?
Well, then we get into, I think the first question on something like that is a verification question. Is it really the person? I think the greater question of invasion of privacy is with private people. I have some questions about accessing the private accounts of the children of famous people. Yes, everything is out there, but just because it is, should you be yanking the information out? 4 years ago, there was a big thing about Rudy Giuliani's daughter liked Obama's Facebook page. And then it became, oh my goodness, those horrible journalists hacked into her stuff. Well, in the end, some of her so-called friends did a screenshot on a private network that she had hit the like button on the Obama. She was trying to get information. It was bad reporting all the way around. So I think if you're talking about private people, again, what is the greater good? That's what I keep coming back to. If you're going to claim greater good, be able to prove it. In that case, if you can show evidence to the public that there really is a greater good, I think you have something to fly with. If you can't, then you need to start asking, where else do I need to go?
I kind of come at that from the other way with students. If they're asking, can they use this, that, or the other for Facebook or Twitter or the social networks, is that does the person who posted that, did they have a reasonable expectation of privacy when they posted it? And if you believe that they did, well, then forget the greater good arguments. You'll have to go and find another way to get around that information. And possibly we should be making sure that students see Facebook in the way that they used to see Wikipedia is a jumping off point. Maybe this is where you start to go and find the other information, but you can't use that as a shortcut. And just to throw some more stuff into the mix, there's been a bit of an issue with Storify recently, that you could actually storify someone's private Facebook posting. It can come through in the Storify button. And Bart Herman is under fire over that, and he's saying, but the user should know at the time that if they're using this, then they have to know that that person wanted it made public, which throws Storify into a whole quagmire I probably wasn't expecting. Anyone, any comments, questions, anything? Tea, coffee?
Okay,
Slow shovel?
Just one quick question.
Yes.
Do you see a difference between the rights and the ethics of publishing something or gathering a story from something that is inherently more private but is still electronic? So an IRC chat, for example, or a private mailing list where something newsworthy is happening versus something that may be happening more in more of a public forum such as Facebook? Because I think some of the issues that you've raised we've seen before in other formats, and I'm just curious if it's more a new technology causing the conversation or if these are really just the same problems we've had.
I think you're right. I think it's a problem with technology, and I think we all had an issue there recently. It was either on the ONA Educators page or the social journalism page, where a journalist did a piece about the topic absolutely escapes me at the moment, but they used as quotes comments that people had said on the group, and then there was like a mini war broke out in the Facebook group because the expectation people had when they were posting was that those comments would be private. So I think technology has really got ahead of us here, and we need to kind of step back slowly and respectfully. And for me, I think it really does come down to trying to come up with a set of guidelines. It's a bit of a bugbear of mine because I've been looking for something to give students. And I've looked at all the, usual suspects. I've looked at the SPJ. They haven't updated their code of ethics since 1996. So I went to Britain and I looked at the NUJ, and they haven't updated theirs since, God knows when. And I don't think it's enough. And people argue, well, the overall ethical principles remain the same. But I don't think that's good enough. And I think that would have helped you guys in the newsroom with the pictures of the victims of Newtown. If there was, it doesn't have to be very specific, but it should address the fact that if you look, say, at the SPJ's guidelines, they were last revised in 96. Look how much has come along since then. I think we do need to address what has happened with technology and give reporters just a set of guidelines to work from.
Even if the rules haven't changed, because there are a lot of places where they haven't, there is an underlying assumption with each new technology that, well, this is new technology, therefore there are no rules. So we need to clarify places where, okay, there are times for Listserv that you don't need to draw from. And there are times when you can draw from information, again, without the specifics. But I think the assumption is, well, if it's new, then there may not be anything. Joanna?
I was just going to mention, there are a couple of guidelines that some of my students have found helpful. RTDNA
Yeah.
Yes.
has done theirs. National Public Radio does have theirs
Beautiful.
published. And Roanoke, interestingly, Roanoke Times newspaper, I think, in Virginia, fairly small paper, did.
Yeah, theirs are excellent.
Yeah, so those are of some help, but they're certainly not specific enough.
I think it's also a perception issue. Back to your question, this notion that Facebook is a public entity. But if I'm sent a private email exchange between the mayor and one of the officials, I'm going to follow up on that and not necessarily publish what I get, but try and confirm it elsewhere. And so this notion that even if it's out there on Facebook, make the call, double check it, ask for permission, stuff like that. If nothing else, it'll save you the blowback reaction from you took something that I didn't think you were going to take, type of thing. So I think that's getting that into the mindset of students. I mean, students are stunning me with how they're using Facebook as a reporting tool. They call it creeping. Has anybody heard this phrase? And I didn't know it, before. I teach an investigative journalism class, and students are talking about creeping people to try to find out information. And I had this one student. She was trying to find the RA of a Florida dorm where a crime occurred, and she was friends with somebody who was friends with somebody, and she put the next to each other, and there was a photo of the group, and she was able to narrow it just by friending and photos that were out there who the RA that she was looking for. And I just looked at it. It was a great piece of reporting, but all done through Facebook and friends and stuff.
The thing that frustrates me a little bit as we talk about different technologies is the pervasive lack of understanding of what certain networks are in in relation to privacy. Facebook is a locked network. You do have to go make conscious choices to friend people to get more information. It's not open. Twitter open tweets are open to the world unless you've protected your tweets. So as a journalist, if you're going to report a story, you have to sneak around in Facebook and friend those people and do the creeping to get to that story. So it should set off some bells in your mind that, okay, I'm looking behind doors, I'm sneaking into someone's house to find out.
I don't know if I go that far with the metaphor,
I don't
but
think
yeah.
people understand the networks well enough either.
No, what was the name? Okay, I'm blanking on the name of the young woman who was arrested in Italy for killing her roommate and Amanda Knox. Sorry. Amanda Knox from Seattle. I was working in Spokane. Several of her friends went to my university. I'm teaching crowdsourcing. In the middle of the crowdsourcing exercise, one of my students received a friend request from a reporter at the Wall Street Journal who said, I saw that you're friends with Amanda Knox and went to high school with her. Can you tell me more about her? You take that on one hand, I was impressed. That was great reporting. On the other hand, she's totally freaked out by the experience.
Right.
So was it ethical? Was it not ethical? We had to have a long conversation. And no matter, I actually tried to persuade her, look, they're just tracking you down and asking you a question. There's not anything unethical about asking a question. She felt as though her privacy were
Well,
invasion.
if the reporter had done more research and got her email and sent that request via email, would she be as...
That might have been
Yeah.
Facebook's kind of clunkiness at the time, that you couldn't message someone unless you were friends with them or something like that. I think it's got easier to contact people through Facebook
But
without
you can still
friending
make
them now.
requests. You can still do a friend request.
I personally wouldn't make a friend request if I was. I mean, you can message them. They would be. I think that was just at the time they didn't have that.
But
functionality.
the bottom line is, even no matter, I didn't see an ethical problem. My point is, she
The
did.
perception.
She did.
But that's when students come like slamming right hard up against this idea that they think everything they do on social media is really, really secret and private. And then say, oh, look, everybody's watching.
Yeah.
How'd that happen? Someone actually up there was...
I was just going to say that the creeping on Facebook is pretty analogous to 5 or 10 years ago, the lurking in chat rooms, where there is some expectation that you're in sort of a closed environment or a friended environment, which is different than the public environment of Twitter. And I think that you should, at some point, if you're going to use any of these exchanges or information, announce your intent, announce who you are, and actually talk to people, and not just take it off of what's there. So.
I also think, we talk about our students and their expectations, but I think we're in this life cycle of understanding social media, and we could look around at ourselves too, we're at this place where we have to figure out how to gain control of these tools instead of just being the cool kid who has all the gadgets. Again, just because you can use it, should you? And I think as educators, the industry is figuring it out. And so, that's a bigger conversation than just what students expect. And I think we should all hold everybody up to a higher standard. And students will mimic what's out there, and there are a lot of bad examples of how to do it. And until we sort of fix that up, we're not going to be able to get through some of these lessons. That's for all of us.
Yeah. I'm going to switch to kind of I guess it's really topic 2B, because it's also kind of privacy related. The question, switching to the journalist and thinking about the journalist's engagement on social media and the ambiguity of boundaries between the personal and the professional roles of journalists. And so Kelly has some thoughts on this, and I think...
Have I any thoughts left? I'll try my final thought for the day. Raju Narasethi, he's a managing editor at the Wall Street Journal now, isn't he? And once upon a time he was at the Washington Post. Is everyone familiar with him? Yeah. Sort of. And he is the man who actually prompted the Washington Post to bring out its social media guidelines. Because God bless him, even though he's a very good journalist, very respected, he's been working in this field for a long time, he was under the impression that if he had a locked Twitter account with under 100 followers, that everything he said in that sphere was private. Silly Raju, huh? So he tweeted a couple of things. I think they were screenshotted and then they were brought to other people's attention, and then the Washington Post kind of hauled him over the carpet because he had made comments about the healthcare law, and he'd made comments about the then oldest member of the US Senate. And anyway, he had thought that this was a private conversation, and he kind of became, for me anyways, almost like the poster child for everything on a social network, no matter what you think of its privacy controls, is actually public. And we've sort of grown into this, you know, sense of comfort maybe with Facebook that everything I do there is going to be private, and if I have a Twitter locked account, it's private. And they're absolutely not. And I'm seeing more and more issues with students thinking that, well, I can say anything that I like on my Facebook page because it's private. And I'm saying to them, well, no, if you're going into journalism, you have to know that everything that you say or do will absolutely be public. It wouldn't make so much difference if you were going into a different profession. But because, especially in the American market, I obviously don't come from America. I don't know if you caught that. But we don't have the same issue outside America with the idea that, you know, journalists have to be objective. We kind of expect our journalists to have an opinion or to, you know, they don't have to go on the one hand and on the other hand so much. So over here, it really is an issue that journalists have to be seen to be objective, which means that they can't engage in any private conversations, I don't think, on Facebook or Twitter. And then for me, that throws up, well, what about the right to free speech? Because we are just taking it away from an entire class of people because we want them to be objective journalists. I'm just throwing that out there.
I don't know if it's free speech as much as don't be stupid, you know.
That's the BBC's rule.
And that's, I mean, you know, and this is, and I was listening to the, what was her name? The UConn professor during the teach-a-thon yesterday talking about students' digital profiles. And I mean, I don't know about you all, but this is like one of the single frustrating things that I run up against with students is the stupid things that they do on Facebook and Twitter. You know, I'll give you one example. A few years ago, I had a student who really just wanted to get into sports broadcast, and I brought in some speakers from ESPN. She connected with them. She did all the right things, was networking with them, friending with them. She went to Waitress on the Cape that summer, and I got a ping from one of my buddies at ESPN saying, "Have you seen her page today?" And I was like, no. And I go on there, and she's got pictures of her in a wet T-shirt contest. And, you know, it just, you know, right, wrong. I mean, morally, what, you know, you can pick your point, but it was a bad professional move, and she blew up the relationships with the people that she had been networking with. And trying to explain this concept to students, they just look at you like, well, you know, why, you know, I mean, it comes to free speech issues, like, why are you taking it so seriously? There's a real almost, I mean, that's, you know, I try not to think of myself as older, but, you know, that's where the generation gap really hits. It's like, why are you being so stupid in this public space where, you know, employers, you know, even though they may not necessarily be supposed to, they're going to Google you, they're going to find your profiles. You know, you want to have a professional look and a professional appearance, and you don't want the Cancun photos up there and how much, you know, how drunk you got last night. And it consistently, over and over again, you run into this.
You know, I don't know if this is any more giving up of our freedom of speech than we have always done, right? I mean, when I was working as a reporter years ago, if I was at a party or a restaurant and I thought some source that I dealt with on a regular basis had done something spectacularly stupid, I didn't say that out loud. You know, I might say it in a private conversation with somebody in my own home or, you know, that person's own home. I might say it in the newsroom, but you know, you've always had to be careful. The difference is
it's amplified.
It's amplified,
you know, 10,000 times
and
now.
It's
like
print, so it's, you know, I can say,
never goes
no, you
away.
didn't understand me right. I said that was actually a really clever thing to do. Not, you know, whatever.
The end of dissembling.
You know, it's much harder to say, no, that word's stupid. I meant something really positive by that.
Before we ask somebody else a question, can I ask Kelly a question?
I don't know, can you?
Well, may I? Now you threw me off. Okay. Does Kelly or anyone think, though, that over time, as American journalism becomes less interested in traditional objective reporting and more opinion-based, do we think that maybe this will change a little bit?
I don't know if I have enough time to answer this. Okay, I would say, let's go back to the New York Times, just for the crack, 2002, 2003, when it was in a position to absolutely, have a conversation on the front pages about this idea that there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And they didn't. And I mean, they fundamentally failed, no question about it, across the board at the Times. And part of it, it's not just Judy Miller, and it's not just, that people were given bad information. It was, well, we have to give both sides equal time. But the side that was arguing about weapons of mass destruction was so comprehensively wrong that if you then compared that maybe to the way that The Guardian was behaving in Britain, there was a much stronger sense within journalism that this is asinine, that there are no WMDs, and all the proof that we're getting, or all the evidence, or all the facts that we're getting from the International Atomic Energy Commission is that it's not there. And so I think this idea of objective journalism is fabulous, but I think it can go so far and so badly wrong that it doesn't serve any public good or any public interest.
Now that we've thrown open a debate about objectivity, we may need another hour, but we'll just narrow it down a little bit. Yes?
Well, I just want to comment on that also, question. I actually think that in today's world, lots of times readers want to see the journalists as human. And this idea that we're these emotionless scientists subjectively reporting the facts is not necessarily right for everybody. It depends on the context and how you write. And this, Jeffrey Jarvis does a lot of work, he writes about public parts. And I think it's the same, and beyond journalists, I also think that people are just living their lives in a public way that our sense of what should be out there and what shouldn't is different for young people, and we have to realize that. And they may not care that there's photos of them.
No, they don't. They don't care.
And
I mean,
there's
that's
so many kids with photos of them half dressed out, then actually the negative effect of it is ameliorated.
They will care when they're 40. Or maybe they won't, actually.
They might want evidence.
Got two more hands up, and then we'll kind of try to wrap it. You've been waiting.
2 points. To your point, I think you're absolutely right. I think when you're talking about giving both sides to the topic and one is absolutely patently wrong, is something that we all feel compelled to do it because we have it ingrained that there are two sides to every story and we must. But the recent example might be Piers Morgan when he interviewed the fellow on a show, I believe his name is Alex Jones. It's the heart and the head is in the right place. You want to give the other side of the argument a fair shot to make the side of the argument, but when the person presenting it is patently incorrect in his facts, then you're not doing due diligence to the nature of journalism. I think that's a very fair point. Back to the privacy discussion for a minute, and something that I like to tell students, I like to tell interns, 95, what I love, and you've all brought it up so beautifully, is that students and the younger set, they love to complain about privacy, and they love to complain about this is my personal space, I can do what I want to it, I can do whatever. Maybe we finally just not put the hammer down, but tell them 95% of the time the best privacy setting, air quotes, privacy setting, is you. And then if for some reason you have any shadow of a doubt that something shouldn't be public, that photo shouldn't be in public, then don't put it there. It can't go public, and it can't go viral, and it can't be passed around and get into the wrong hands. If you yourself don't, 95% of the time, there's going to be that short period of time where somebody tweets what you said or puts up a photo of you, you can ask them to take it down. But 95% of the time, you're putting that stuff out there yourself. And if you don't want it out there and you think you're going to regret it being out there at the time, well, maybe the culture needs to change, or maybe the mindset needs to change. And that goes all the way back to the start of the discussion. The mindset of, I should put this out because I can.
Can versus should, yeah. Okay, yes.
Being of that younger set that you guys are referencing, just to admit, I have been taught a lot lot more in the last couple of years of how to censor and be more essentially private. I understand that my stuff on my sites is not private. I know not everyone's under that impression because they haven't been educated in that respect. But as of late, teachers have gotten a lot better about explaining to us the fact that nothing we have is private. So not everyone's under some, like, you know, in some imaginary unicorn land where we're going to think that we're going to have nothing on there that's going to impede us from getting a job. And I mean, also, you think about it, Facebook changes its privacy settings almost every single day. It's kind of ridiculous at this point. You can't keep track of what's public and private. I wasn't aware that my account was entirely private for a couple of months. And it's perfectly fine because I had an employer look through my entire Facebook account, and I'm perfectly clean because I choose what I put up there, and I'm intelligent enough to make that decision. Not everyone is, but if you're in this field, I feel like you should have that ability if you're going to be making calls on stories themselves. So if you're worried about the younger generation, you know, give them the tools. We're being taught certain things, and if they make that wrong call, they shouldn't be in a newsroom in the first place, in my humble opinion.
Thanks.
I am HOTU.
Yeah, 5 minutes, and so a few more comments. And we'll,
I think it's important to note that even our discussion of ethics is coming from a particular viewpoint, and that ethics are colored geopolitically, according to religion, various other things like that. If we're talking about what people expect of journalists, because of social media, our audience is global now. We're not talking about specific things, which just confounds everything that, of course, we're thinking about. But I wondered if anyone had any comment about how to approach a global audience when we're used to being a regional group.
Where's Jim Brady gone?
Yeah.
well, I think, you know, that's where developing ethics with a lot of voices involved is important. You know, the questions of developing protocols of questions to ask about these topics, the dialogue needs to be very broad about what those ought to be. Dialogic, as scholars say.
Yes, and there is an assumption if you're from the dominant Western culture that you're normal, and anybody else will catch up to you eventually. They'll progress. So as that conversation occurs, it has to be done with a certain amount of humility. And I always crack up when I use the word humility. Somehow it just seems a little odd. But the idea that I think the most important way to approach global questions is not the assumption that everyone is like me, not the assumption that I am the only right way, and particularly not the assumption that the people who are most right are the ones who have progressed. We can get really ethnocentric really quick when we start talking about global ethics.
I have this daydream that if we'd had Twitter back in 2002, 2003, and it was global and we had all these other voices coming in, maybe we wouldn't have invaded Iraq. Maybe we wouldn't have thought of, you know, maybe Colin Powell wouldn't have been able to sell that job at the UN. Maybe it's not true, but that's one of the plus sides of Twitter.
It's certainly an interesting thing to think about.
Well said.
I was talking to someone last night saying, what if we had Twitter during 9/11? Yeah. Can you imagine the misinformation coming out of that?
But it would have been corrected very quickly, and it would have been corrected in real time. And I think that's another plus of Twitter that gets lost in the negatives.
I'll say a couple last comments for this hour, but please continue on Twitter off. Please come and talk, but yes.
What about using social media to do sort of undercover investigations and, you know, lurking in the chat, it's equivalent of lurking in chat groups of people that are maybe doing criminal activities or, you know, the kind of masquerading.
The last place I worked was Spokane, Washington, when the Spokesman Review hired a criminal investigator to do undercover work and pose as a gay young man, underage gay young man, in a chat room. I had a lot of questions about that, and a lot of people in the gay community had a lot of questions about that. And again, I keep going back to the greater good. Eventually, Jim West was ousted from office, whether or not he should have been, one could have argued lots of things. No one ever proved him to be a pedophile. And the gay community was furious because many gay people felt like this only made all gay people look like pedophiles. I come back to, do you have a reasonable expectation that it's worth it? Now, Steve Smith will be the first one to tell you, oh yeah, he believed that and still does. But that, I think, is where the question comes in.
At the end of the day, you're still doing journalism, and I read the first thing that immediately came to my mind is how he's doing that different from, I forget the year and I forget the name of the court case, but I know the concept of the employees that went to the grocery store,
Food Lion.
Food Lion.
went in and pretended
Classic
to be
case.
butchers and, went undercover and exposed what the grocery store was doing, and that was, they got in a lot of trouble for that. So I don't see any difference between that and Food Lion in
Here's-
terms of, you are misrepresenting yourself.
Here's the other side of that, though. The Kansas City Star did all the background research and actually won lots of awards for their research that included all the information that was done in Food Lion.
As far as undercover, I mean, it's interesting because students they want to do undercover first before they do the research.
Right.
And before they go out and talk to people. And I'm
It's
like,
about the tools,
so you want to go
not
out
about...
and misrepresent yourself before going out and finding out what paper's out there. So it's and it's a lot of that becomes, the movie, the Hollywood, version of what journalists aren't, but, how they're depicted.
Cecil Labat talks in her...
Well, I guess I've got to give you the last word.
Try
We'll do
stopping
it,
him.
then we'll keep talking.
Sorry,
Cecil
Stop doing your
Labat
tracks.
talks about the whole idea of the first question should be, is there another alternative to violating secrets and to lying? And I think anytime you talk about any kind of invasion of privacy, anything, is there an alternative that you should consider?
That was a great question to end on. Very useful question for ethics. Thank you all, and again, please let's keep talking about this. Tweet everything else you want to do to get engaged on this. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks to our panelists.